On a Monday, the 19th day of March, 2018. Steve Marshall, Attorney General of the state of Alabama, our guest this morning. Steve, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're honored to have you this morning. And you've been crisscrossing the state of Alabama. We're going to be talking about that in just a few minutes. But news that is news this morning, Nichols Lawson Middle School and Coosa Valley Academy are two of the 10 recipients of the 2017 Attorney General's Safe Schools Initiative Award of Excellence, and that is a good thing.
Oh, it is a good thing, especially now when school safety is such a hot topic for us in this country, for us to be able to acknowledge those 10 best examples of what we're doing in the state, and for two of those to be local, I think speaks volumes to what educators and what we're doing for kids.
Fantastic. You're going to be at Coosa Valley Medical Center with the Sylacauga Chamber of Commerce coffee in just a little while. What brings you to Sylacauga?
Well, we've been trying to travel around the state to discuss what we've been putting together relating to the issue of opioids in the state. When we know that Alabama is number one per capita in opioid prescriptions in the country, when we see that...
That's not a good number one.
No, that's not a good number one. And when we know that we've had a quadrupling of the number of those who have died from overdose since 2008, it is obviously a significant issue for us in Alabama. And so one of the things we've been talking about are the 27 recommendations that have been put together about how we deal with that in the state, how it impacts our medical community, that we want to be able to acknowledge that, number one, opioids are necessary for many people, and that we need to acknowledge that, but also that we need to do better about how it is that we're prescribing, storing, and disposing of these medications.
How did Alabama become number one in prescription of opioids?
That's a great question, and I don't know that anybody can really give you that answer. One of the things that we've learned through this study is that we don't really have very good data. And so one of the things that we see with regard to our prescribing patterns and why we've gotten to this point is at least nobody can really tell you what is that true cause. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is to examine what we have, to be able to talk to those who are experts, but then also say we're going to look forward and not back. Mm-hmm. You know, not try to necessarily place blame, but how is it that we can use best practices going forward?
And not everybody's a bad guy in this. You mentioned that this is a needed medication.
It is a needed medication. And one of the things that we've seen is that historically that doctors were trained with data that isn't valid, with science that we now know is inaccurate. And so that for many in the medical profession, they'll tell you that for a while they were taught on how to prescribe this medication that didn't turn out to be accurate. And then beyond that, we've got to make sure that we're doing a good job in being able to not only educate our medical community, but also the people of this state, mm-hmm. to make sure that we're not storing this medication in the house after we need it, because that's where kids have access and that's where kids begin using these particular drugs.
Particular parts of Alabama more susceptible than others?
We've seen some hot spots, and then one of the things that we're trying to examine is that why do we see kind of in the western part of the state, mm-hmm. along the beginning of the Appalachian, why we have problems in that area, why there's other spots where we see more overdose deaths. You know, one of the things that we are putting together, and one of the proposals that came out, was the ability for researchers to come in and get access to data, de-identified, but yet real data, that they can identify areas and people and prescribing patterns that may have contributed to the problems. Mm-hmm. So we look forward to being able to bring some very bright people that have the ability to decipher data and to be able to analyze data in an appropriate way that can further the recommendations that we have going forward.
Steve Marshall, Attorney General of the state of Alabama, with us for a few more moments today. You mentioned the 27 points.
Yes.
Highlight a couple of those.
You know, one of those really deals with how we're going to educate communities. That we need to make sure that we're being very proactive in being able to reach out and be able to talk to parents and to kids about the potential consequences of this drugs. And so we really look at the education component as being important, but we need to make sure that we're doing supply control, so that, for example, that we're not number one per capita in the country, that we're trying to make sure that we have appropriate prescribing patterns, but then from a law enforcement perspective, that we're looking for those pill mills, so that those that are our bad docs or our bad pharmacists that are out there really putting these drugs basically illegally on the street, we need to be able to identify them and hold them accountable. And then the other thing is that we need to work on the treatment side of the house, that there is still historically this stigma that exists for those that would seek help. We need to encourage people that there are treatment opportunities available, that there are proven techniques to be able to help somebody deal with issues involving opioids, heroin, and fentanyl, and that we need to encourage people to enter into those treatment programs.
You talked early on about proper storage of our medications, including the opioid.
Yeah, when somebody breaks into your house, they're going to look for three things. They're going to look for your money, your jewelry, and your pills. And so that when we look at how these drugs actually get out to those other than those for whom they're prescribed, one of the things that we know is simply that maybe like me, I had shoulder surgery. I took a hydrocodone for a couple of days, but I had probably 2 weeks or more of a supply. I just put that in a drawer and didn't think about it. Well, that's one way where people can get access. And so one of the things that we have to encourage and we have to educate is that when you're done with that pain medicine, that we need to dispose of it, and we also need to dispose of it safely.
And it doesn't necessarily mean someone is a bad person. They've got some issues that need to be dealt with.
Absolutely. And that's why part of the discussion, as we talked about earlier, it was very important, is to be able to say this medication has its purpose, and that clearly those that are out there that have, let's say end-of-life pain, or those that are suffering from some type of cancer, that there are real reasons for it. But then we need to be able to, from the industry standpoint, we need to encourage investment in non-opioid pain treatments so that we can find ways that those who have chronic pain that previously have been using an opioid, that we find something effective to be able to help them going forward.
Individuals who have suffered from chronic pain and maybe watching this morning that suffer from chronic pain now may have seen changes already when they visit their local doctor.
They may, and one of the things that we were very conscious of, I worked very hard when I was a district attorney in dealing with the crystal meth lab problem, where ephedrine and pseudoephedrine was something you had to have to be able to cook it. And Mississippi went to prescription only. They said that the way to deal with the meth labs was to require somebody to go to a doctor to get their Sudafed. Well, I thought that was too far. And instead, we use our ID so that you go to the pharmacy. They do a little use of technology to make sure you're not buying too much, but don't interfere much in that doctor-patient relationship, or government doesn't get in the business of telling doctors how to do it. I'm very cognizant here that we need to make sure that we're being responsible in our policy, but we don't do anything to affect that doctor-patient relationship in an adverse way.
We're talking with Attorney General of Alabama, Steve Marshall, who will be at Coosa Valley Medical Center addressing the folks there. And Coosa Valley Medical Center, our largest employer in our city. How important is it that you position yourself to be before medical organizations like this to continue that education?
Well, it's twofold. Number one, we want to share with them what we're doing so they have an understanding of what's coming forward. But also, every time I get in front of one of those groups, I learn something new as well. And that what they're able to share with me from their own personal experience is something that I can take back, that this task force that's still working, we're attempting to implement those recommendations I told you about, that allows us to continually refine that plan going forward. Because one of the things that was very important when I went to see Governor Ivey is it's one thing to study a problem, but it's more important what we do about it. And so that needs to be a living, breathing document that we make sure has value to the people that are affected by it the most. And so when we have the opportunity to meet with our medical community, when we're out there being able to share what we're doing, we also receive the feedback that we need to make sure that we're doing it correctly.
Now, you are appointed State Attorney General, some year and a half ago or so?
In February of last year, yes.
Okay. And are you going to run for that position in June?
Yeah, my wife says I need a job, so we're going to continue to do that. But no, it has been a remarkable blessing for me to be able to serve as Attorney General. I'm a career prosecutor, 20 years of my life, been working with law enforcement around the state, the opportunity to be able to be that voice and advocate for victims as well. And so it's been a great privilege for me to be able to serve, and we hope to be able to show the people of the state what we've done and to be able to continue to give a vision for where we want to go in the future.
Finally, this morning, this show goes into 650,000 households, and I'm sure that families that are watching, some have been affected by the opioid crisis. If that's that person this morning or a family member, what would be the first thing you would tell them to do?
I think the first thing to tell them to do is if somebody needs treatment, that we need to proactively be able to find an opportunity for treatment. Unfortunately, those who suffer don't always necessarily see that they have problems and may not necessarily be receptive to that, but they need to be able to find local opportunities for somebody who needs help to be able to get help. And at that point in time, we need to also necessarily encourage recovery, because we see that multiple success stories around the state. where we know that individuals who've had problems have been able to turn their lives around, and we need to be able to encourage the opportunity for those who need help, want to seek help, to be able to get that help.
We've seen stories of the pill mills, as you described earlier. Are those still operative in Alabama? Are they pretty much out of the picture now?
Well, we think that we've identified those. In fact, recent arrest in Mobile of a neurologist who is contributing significantly to this problem. But one of the things that we've done, I actually met with Attorney General Jeff Sessions last Friday in his office, sharing with him those things that we need from a law enforcement area in Alabama, specific data that's collected by DEA, so that we can partner with them to identify those pill mills and then to be able to attack them aggressively from a law enforcement side.
And to be sure, this is not a problem only for Alabama, it's a nationwide crisis.
No, it's nationwide. In fact, today, President Trump will announce a national plan that has recommendations, frankly, consistent with some of those things that we put together in Montgomery. Very much appreciate the Trump administration being proactive on this and allowing us to be a partner.
Steve Marshall, Attorney General of the State of Alabama, our guest this morning. Steve, it's a pleasure, sir, and thanks for coming to Sylacauga.
Thank you very much.
We got more Daybreak just ahead. Don't go away.